And it just kind of naturally arose from practice. As you guys know, I consider myself more than anything else a practitioner of holacracy, kind of surrendering myself to this space and seeing what shows up. And over these 5 years or so practicing holacracy, some patterns have emerged. And I thought they were kind of interesting patterns because they begin to answer some of the dilemmas, some of the Gordian knot kind of problems that we've been wrestling with, lots of us practicing holacracy. Like, does holacracy have anything to say about people, all us humans showing up? Does holacracy have anything to say about this intersubjective space, as the integralists call it, that space between people, where friction can naturally arise from just humans working together? Does holacracy have anything to say about that? And we've wrestled with all sorts of ideas and options and experiments. And over time, these patterns have emerged, these spaces, as I call them, from just practicing. And it's one of those principles that we teach and preach. It's just paying attention ruthlessly to reality and let reality tell you what's needed. And for me, this was just a simple matter of observation over a multi-year period, sure, but just observing my reality as it showed up for me and capturing it in a way to begin to share with others. So with that, I will share my screen and share some slides that I put together to just kind of capture what it is that I am seeing in these spaces. And let me get this over. So when I do this, I can't see you. So I'm going to make sure, Deborah, does that look appropriate to our setting?
Yes, Tom, it looks perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. So seeing spaces, contexts emerging from holacracy practice. Well, what are these spaces that we're seeing emerge? Well, there are four of them that I'm seeing, and four of them that I experience, and I see others experiencing as well. Something called personal space, really very familiar to all of us, and yet holacracy shifts this a little bit. We'll talk about those shifts. And then tribe space. This is this wonderful panoply of us humans coming together and sharing ideas and values and fun things that we like to talk about. Tribe space is an interesting one. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on that as we get started. That's our second space. And then role space. This is one that's, I think, kind of unique to holacracy. What happens when we have a bunch of roles showing up and working together as opposed to a bunch of people showing up and working together. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then finally, organization space. And I think holacracy has a lot to say about organization space and what happens there, what it feels like, the texture of that space to be in that kind of context. So these are the four spaces that I see arising from practicing holacracy. And the first two, personal space and tribe space, they're kind of uniquely about the individual and the group. So it's about us and our experiences as humans and choices we make about sharing those experiences. And then the other two are uniquely organizational, especially how holacracy frames and defines organizational as separate from individual. So this has a lot more relevance, I think, in the way holacracy defines an organization as something separate from ourselves. You hear us say over and over, something that pursues its own purpose, the organization's purpose, its evolutionary purpose. So these spaces, role space and organization space, are about the organization's purpose and what happens in those spaces to get the organization's work done. So these are the four spaces: personal space, tribe space, role space, and organization space. Let's talk a little bit about tribe space. This is a really interesting one. You know, a lot of the creative ideas that have come from Holacracy and HolacracyOne occur in tribe space for us. And it just dawned on me that this is how we like to work together, humans. We have a space of shared context, shared values, shared interests, ways we make meaning of the world. We come together and we like to talk about things in this space. So for me, this is the dining room table or the breakfast conversations that occur, and just honoring and recognizing that that is a natural occurring space that we humans like to show up in. And it really bugged me for a while, even early days in HolacracyOne, and definitely in the organizations that I was associated with before. You know, we would have these, even at HolacracyOne dinners, and have lively conversations about all sorts of topics, life, universe, and everything kind of subjects. And invariably, we'd talk about holacracy and holacracy-related stuff. And folks would start having grand ideas. And Brian in particular would talk about all sorts of options and possibilities and innovations and ideas. And I would start getting this tense feeling in my body. It was like, I like exploring these, but I don't want our context to convey that there's any sort of organizational authority at play here, or these ideas are going to get taken in any way or done anything with. And of course, Brian would always caveat, well, I'm just playing with ideas, and I'm just having fun exploring this space. And that would relax me a bit. And it wasn't until I realized that what I was feeling was this implied assumption of power and authority that comes from the typical way tribe space shows up, where we get together and have ideas, share ideas about what might be, what could be, and then one of two things happen. Either you're doing that as an individual contributor in an organization and you're in the presence of some authority figure or boss, and you feel like since the boss didn't say anything, maybe he thinks that's a good idea, so I'll just go forward with that. Or on the other side of it, maybe you are the boss and you're thinking, oh my God, I hope what I'm sharing here passionately doesn't show up as actual work. I'm just sharing my ideas. And so what I've found is we need to honor this tribe space. And holacracy shifts things a little bit. So in holacracy, organizations actually give rise to tribe space because organizations are this kind of attractor, this strange attractor that draws people to it, that have common interests, that are aligned with the organization's purpose. I see this over and over again, of course, in all the organizations we work with. Organizations attract like-minded individuals, passionate individuals about the stuff the organization is doing, which is awesome. So organizations give rise to tribes. But in conventional organizations, we look at that tribe space as a way to get work done. In fact, there's a whole lot of research and a whole lot of books, really good ones that I like a lot even, that talk about how to enhance the tribe, those individuals that come together around an organizational idea, to improve the work of the organization. And the one that comes to mind is Dan Logan's work on tribal leadership, which is a great book, and it talks about 5 stages of tribal culture. And I find those stages showing up in reality as well. Everything from early stage where it's all about me, and I think he frames it as life sucks and this is terrible, all the way up to a highly empowered, motivated, and engaged group of people aligned with the purpose of the organization. But here's the thing. In tribe space, in conventional organizations, we're trying to get work done by improving the tribe, by enhancing the way leadership shows up, the way personal and professional development is applied. And I think this is misplaced, actually. I think this in some way contaminates tribe space, and it projects organizational needs that simply aren't there into a space that simply isn't ready for it or appropriate to it. And with holacracy in play, we actually shift quite a bit here. Tribe space is not about getting organizational work done at all. It is a place for us humans to gather together and talk about things that interest us, including work, which I think is a really cool thing. There's no organizational authority when you're practicing holacracy in tribe space because we know where organizational authority resides. It resides in the roles that we hold and the accountabilities that we hold. So roles aren't showing up here in tribe space, people are. And people are having conversations about things that matter to them, things that they're interested in, things that have meaning for them. So with Holacracy, we're free to just show up and innovate and even inspire one another to have fun or to show up differently, to energize our roles differently. I find this is really fascinating because some of our best discoveries, I think, around holacracy have occurred in tribe space, of integrating our experiences together, sharing those experiences together. New terms of art will show up. I remember over one dinner we were talking with Linda, who many of you know, Linda Behrens, who's got fantastic work that's baked into holacracy. And we were talking about these roles that show up and the characteristics of roles. And all of a sudden, Alexia popped up. What we're talking about here are role relationships or relationships. And it was just a beautiful, spontaneous, innovative moment. And lots of those are happening in tribe space. And it was interesting. We had that innovation with being unburdened from an organizational impetus to innovate, right? It just naturally occurred in this space. That's one of the beauties, I think, about recognizing these naturally occurring spaces. Tribe space, just being a naturally occurring space that we humans show up in, where we can make discoveries about ourselves or others. We can model behaviors. We can inspire others to show up differently. I think holacracy can completely reframe the notion of corporate or company retreats. And now with my holacracy ears on and looking at things through holacracy lenses, that actually sounds odd to me, where you have all hands meetings coming together for corporate retreats to get corporate work done, corporate team building. That actually sounds odd to me now because I wonder what organizational purpose, what organizational need is actually being met. And I think the more realistic honoring of reality is that it's actually the people associated with the organization that want to get together, that need to get together, to inspire one another, to model different behaviors. And so I think there's just interesting ways of framing how and why we come together in this tribe space. So this is the first one that I talk about because it anchors everything else and it's the one we're most familiar with. It's the one most of us come from when we show up in organizations. And I think this is also one of the things I talk about with holacracy. We shift from organizing around the people to organizing around the work. And in tribe space, we're really all about the people. And for those businesses, those institutions that are organizing around people, it makes a lot of sense to try to improve tribe space in the hopes of getting better organizational work done. But in holacracy, we have none of that. We don't try to improve people in hopes of getting organizational work done. We have a different mechanism of getting clarity on what that organizational work is and how to track towards the organization's purpose. So that's a little bit about tribe space. And then the next one up is role space. So role space is where the vast majority of the organization's work is done. And when you think about it, if you look at the amount of time spent in holacratic meetings like strategy, tactical, and governance meetings, that's a small fraction of the actual time we spend helping an organization pursue its purpose. So the vast majority of time in an organization, in a holacratic organization, is spent in role space, showing up in the roles that you hold, doing the work as specified by the accountabilities of those roles, and interacting with other roles and figuring it all out. It's the messiness of where reality and operations and plans all meet and you figure out what's needed to get the work done. And this is role space. This is where role relationships occur. I think this is a really interesting term and one that could be explored a whole lot more. I think we're just now starting to get some interesting data on this. What does a role relationship look like as opposed to a interpersonal or personal relationship? With role relationships, we have clear authorities, clear boundaries, clear understanding of what the work is. And we can interact with other roles in relationship to either following roles or leading our roles. So I think these role relationships have some interesting side effects, some positive benefits for us as role holders. It instills good leadership and good followership behaviors and helps us to understand the difference between those two, how to lead our roles and how to follow other roles. And this is another hallmark, I think, of holacracy in that everything is distributed, we say, including leadership. And this is where that shows up. So every role is leading. Every other role from time to time is following. So we have this interesting dynamic of leadership and followership in role relationships in role space. And this is where the sensing is occurring. This is where we are actually doing the work. We're out in the world helping the organization to pursue its purpose, to make manifest its purpose. This is where reality informs us about how we're working together, how things are tracking, what our sense of things are. This is where sensors become aware of tensions in the roles they hold, oftentimes, doing the work. So role space is all about fully occupying the role and the accountabilities that you hold and executing on that and sensing into reality about how things are actually working around here, sensing tensions that arise from that doing of that work, and then bringing those tensions into the appropriate places to improve things, to change things, to incrementally step forward towards purpose. So role space is kind of the messiness of an organization. It's where all the work's happening. And it's the vast amount of time again. I can't tell you in early adoptions, especially all of us who've been early exposed to holacracy, our first exposure is often governance meetings and tactical meetings. And we tend to associate those things with holacracy. But we forget that those meetings are a small fraction of the time we actually spend doing the organization's work. So role space is huge. It's where the work of the organization is done. And because we have this clarity of separation of role and soul, it's not personal, we get the freedom to really energize or wear our roles, some folks might say, or swallow our roles, as others might say. But to fully embody the role and to get into the habit of knowing where the boundaries are, getting clarity of no, one of our blog posts that Brian posted, knowing what your authorities are and aren't, and being free to say, that's not my role, or ask others that are coming to you for assistance, what's your role's authority to ask for that? So we have some interesting dynamics in role space where it's safe to ask these questions. It's safe to experiment and play with these role relationships. And what shifts here for me is to move from a sense of fusion with role. We talk about the separation of role and soul. So instead of being fused to that personally and maybe even charged or triggered emotionally about role holding and role authority, to shift to a more appreciative stance, almost an appreciative inquiry of, you've heard me say, well, isn't that interesting? You don't have that authority. Or isn't that interesting? I'm not really clear on what my role's authority is. So take a different stance towards a more appreciative inquiry into the nature and structure of the organization's work. So it's an interesting shift in this role space. And I think the funny thing is, from a different perspective, from an outsider's perspective, This probably looks very much like any conventional organization. You have a whole bunch of people doing a whole bunch of work and projects and individual tasks and selling things and building things and delivering things and coaching other people and all the work of the organization. So it looks from the outside like a conventional workspace. And yet we know there's significant shifts on the inside. How we got to those roles and how we hold those roles ourselves has shifted dramatically. So from the outside, folks might say, well, what's the difference? All these people working together to do work. Huge difference. Clarity, boundaries, knowing where one thing starts and another stops, and what to do when there's tension, when you sense something that could be different or better. So all of the interiors are different. The exteriors tend to look the same. I find that kind of interesting. So that's role space. And then moving from role space, we go up to organizational space. And organization space is it's sacred space. This is where it's the take a breath, you hear me say sometimes. And I've really come to know this better over the last probably couple years. This sacredness of organization space. It's where things get quiet. This is the place of our structured meetings. This is the place of the governance meeting, the tactical meeting, and strategy meetings. This is a space of listening to the organization's needs. And it's where we rely on ritual, rhythm, and cadence to get our attention focused on the other. And the way Holacracy holds that, the other is the organization's purpose, not our own. So this feels very different. This is the awkwardness, clunkiness, impersonal nature we often point to, and for good reason. We are here, we are gathered together to do the work of the organization and to listen into that, sense into what the organization needs. I've begun to call this like attending church or going to the dojo or temple or meditation, whatever works for you. It's the boundary of moving from space about you to space about another. And in those spaces, we often have rituals or rhythms or cadences to help us structure our thoughts, to be mindful of what's needed, mindful of the difference between our needs as individuals, even our needs as role holders, and the needs of the organization. So organization space is something I call sacred space. It's quiet, and it's infrequent. And deeply impersonal. This is the quality that we often hear early practitioners. It was like, where did all the fun go? Where did all the juice of my interpersonal relationships go? Well, hey, we have an answer to that now. They go to tribe space, and it gets even juicier there because you're unfettered from all sorts of power and authority structures. You just get to show up and play. But organizational space is deeply impersonal. It is all about serving that other, listening to the other's needs, and figuring out what's necessary to move things forward. It's where the encoding occurs. So listening, this is hard work. I know a lot of folks early in practice, when we're just starting to present proposals and just starting to get into structuring the organization with roles and accountabilities, at the end of those meetings, it's like you wipe the sweat from your brow. It's like, damn, that was hard work, really getting clear on what's needed. What's the structure and function that this organization needs to encode to make sure it's pursuing its purpose? And we're staying aligned in pursuit of that purpose. So this is hard work. This takes a lot of concentration, a lot of thoughtfulness, a lot of mindfulness about what's needed. And luckily, we have rhythms and structures and cadences to fall back on. I love this space also. David Allen has a whole bunch of wonderful quotes and pointing out instructions. But one of the things he talks about with GTD as a practice is it's for when you get stupid. You know, I just kind of like that. We all from time to time get stupid and forget and go on our merry ways or go unconscious, asleep sometimes. And so practices are for when we get stupid. It's something that we lean on. And I like that about organization space. It's over time with practice, it's a place of safety. It's a place you come back to continue to pay attention to what the organization needs. And the outputs of organization space give you clear structures, clear authority, clear roles, clear policy. And on the tactical side of things, the operational side of things, clear synchronization, removing anything in the way of getting that work done. So this is organization space. It feels a whole lot different than role space even, and a whole lot different than tribe space for sure. So let's see, where did our personal space go? See if I can catch up. So yeah, one last comment on this. This occurs all the time as well in early adoption and even later in practice. I think we forget that holacracy is not all about governance meetings. Holacracy is not all about tactical meetings or strategy meetings. In fact, if you look at it from a circles perspective, you've got, let's say, 3 hours of governance and an hour and a half, 90-minute tactical meetings four times a month. So that's 9 hours a month, 9 whole hours of time in church, if you will. 9 hours that you're spending in this structured sacred space for the organization. The rest of the time is in role space. So it's interesting. We need to look at these different spaces to inform us about how to show up for the organization. This is also a clue if we're spending all of our time in organization space or think we are or think we're limited to that, we're probably doing it wrong. This gave rise to some early commentary that organizations were playing holacracy. In other words, they were spending all their time in these meetings just to get the sense of integrating perspectives and clear outputs. But that actually doesn't serve the organization. We need to be out in the world doing the work of the organization in role space. And on the flip side of that, folks early in practice think, oh my God, I'm going to be spend all this time in meetings. And honestly, it's quite the reverse. Once you have the cadence, the rhythm, the ritual of coming together in organization space for 3 hours a month for governance and 90 minutes a week for tactical, all the other meetings tend to fall off. Things get much clearer. You're executing autocratically in the roles you hold. Things move much faster. So you're actually spending much less time in meetings instead of more. So that's a bit on organization space. And, well, folks, working with Keynote might be able to help me go forward and not backwards. Let's see, there we go, personal space. So on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, personal space. So here we're showing up, of course, ourselves, but in a holacratic context, we have the personal sovereignty is honored because of all these other distinctions that we're making in role space and organization space and tribe space. Personal space becomes now even more clear, where we can honor personal sovereignty and understand the distinction of role and soul, that we are making personal choices to lend our time, our talent, our energy to help something else greater than ourselves, beyond ourselves, move forward. I like how personal space is offset from these other spaces. I think it just gives it more clarity about the sacredness, the specialness that each of us are as humans, and the work that we do individually, and the choices we make about how to do that work. So in these contexts, in these spaces, personal space is deeply honored. The sovereignty, the perfectness, the natural perfection, we sometimes call it, of every individual is honored, just as they are. No more, no less. The organization isn't trying to fix them or change them in any way, just invite them to play. And I really like that about how Holacracy even reshapes and frames personal space in relationship to the organizational space. So the freedom here is to choose if or how your purpose is in alignment with the organization's purpose. I really like this as well. This speaks a lot to the conscious business, conscious capitalism movement. It's making conscious choices as individuals about how we align our work in the world with the organizations that we choose to be in relationship with, the organization's work. So personal space is about really being mindful that you have some choices to make as an individual on how you want to show up and do your work, and what kind of organizations, what type of organizations do you want to be in relationship with, and do those organizational purposes align with your own. We talk a lot about fit for organization. I think this is where we start to identify what that fit is and what that fit looks like. What are the characteristics of someone well suited to help the organization move forward towards its purpose? What about your purpose is well aligned and well suited? So it invites just some different questions, more introspection about how you show up in this relationship to the organization. It turns the lights on, as I sometimes say. So no longer are you the oppressed employee or a victim of some personal egoic fusion that's happening in the organization with respect to power. With these four spaces and with Holacracy at play, you get to show up and choose, because it really is all about you and all about your assessment of your own fit for the organization. So it's interesting here too that interdynamics, interpersonal relationships show up here, but again by choice. So this is another thing that I find very empowering as a former leader, business leader, conventional executive, conventional power holder. I always felt restricted. Somehow I had to hold back, or I couldn't have interpersonal or personal relationships with folks because of the power at play, the risks of projection, or the risk of being misinterpreted. And I find that this space, these different spaces, these different contexts allow me to show up and choose the types of relationships that I want personally with the people that I work with. I find this really powerful as well. I can pick and choose the type of interpersonal relationships I want, and cultivate those or not, and feel no obligation that the organization's trying to force those, because somehow that makes the work get done better. Actually, that just has a really sour taste now. That leaves a really sour taste when I think about trying to improve interpersonal relationships, personal ones, for the organization's benefit. That somehow seems violating in this frame. Now, that said, bringing tools to enhance interpersonal relationships by choice is awesome. And there are bunches of them out there. And we talk a lot about the tools we use at HolacracyOne. Again, I'll mention Linda and her work, having the clarity of how we show up, how we behave and interact with others, what our preferences are, what our biases are. All of that comes into play in personal space, but by the choice of the people to improve their relationships. I think this invites a different way of holding how the organization might promote or support that activity. think there's an interesting line, an interesting boundary to be played with there, and a lot more of experimentation of what that boundary and line is. But for me, it's the sovereignty of the individual choice about what kind of relationships they want, and then what kind of tools are available to enhance those relationships. So even all the way to choosing not to interact at all. And I think this is also perfectly acceptable. Individuals coming into this system who really don't want the interpersonal relationships, but are really well aligned with the organization's purpose and fired up about that. But can relax in feeling that there is no organizational obligation to try to be anything other than you are, and let that be okay. So you have the freedom to choose as much or as little interaction on the personal level as you see fit and seems appropriate. So I think this also helps frame how we show up as individuals. Now, the interesting thing is, I believe, with these spaces, with these different contexts, I have become clearer now over the last probably year and a half that holacracy as an organizational practice has absolutely nothing to say about personal space and very little, if nothing, to say about tribe space. And I think trying to force folks to show up differently or force tribal kind of relationships, group or social kind of relationships, is not the purview of the organization. And the interesting thing is, as soon as you make that distinction, as soon as you have the clarity of no, that's not the organizational purview, then it gives you the freedom to do all sorts of really cool things in those spaces to enhance and get the outcomes that we were seeking anyway back in the organizational space. It's just an interesting paradox. As soon as you get clarity of what is or is not inbounds, what is or is not the authority of the organization versus the authority of the individual, things get real clear and cool things can happen. So these are the four spaces. Again, no organizational power at play in personal space, of course. So we have the four spaces coming together: personal space, tribe space, role space, and organizational space. And these are the contexts that I see arising from holacracy practice and match my experiences over the last 5 years of practicing holacracy. Through the practice, through the organizational practices, I've gotten much clearer on the social intersubjective interactions between people. And it's really helped me understand and deepen my own practice because I can relax into it. It's kind of like when we say there are multiple pathways to process attention organizationally. Having these contexts, having these spaces allow me to relax into my own sense of how I want to contribute, when and where, how to show up in organizational space and what to expect, how to show up in role space and what to expect there. And then the freedom that it gives in tribe space just to innovate and model and maybe mentor and have all kinds of fun discussing things that interest us as collective tribes. And the interesting thing there is multiple tribes emerging. HolacracyOne is a tribe for sure. Each of the organizations that are calling in here attract their own individuals, their own like-minded and passionate individuals. Those are tribes for sure. And then we have this thing called holacracy as a practice. I think that is a strange attractor in itself, attracting a tribe of folks that are interested in distributed authority systems for the purpose of helping an organization do its work in the world. So tribe space is really interesting to me within the practice of holacracy. I think there's a lot more research, a lot more experiments to be run there, a lot more fruits to be had from being in tribe space. And then the personal space as well. Just knowing, reminding myself that I have choices about how I show up when I show up and who I show up with. And it allows me to take my mindful practice, my spiritual practice, if you will, into this organizational arena with clear boundaries and safety to do so. So these are the 4 spaces emerging from my practice of holacracy. These are some of my experiences of being in these spaces and what has given rise to me seeing the differentiations of these spaces. And I think we wanted to leave some time for some Q&A. So we've got a little bit of time remaining in the hour. And I'm going to drop out of my screen share mode and drop back into Adobe mode where I can see Deborah.
Great.
And maybe we had some questions
Yeah,
from
we've
folks.
had a number of questions, and I first just want to thank you so much. As I said, when I first heard you make these distinctions, it just really clarified so much for me, having heard, holacracy is not about the people, and these distinctions light up where the people show up and how that actually liberates the people much more. So thank you again, Tom. I want to bring up some of the questions that were asked here in the chat window. Linda Behrens asked, what about when the work is the innovation, like in design work? And Linda, I'm going to enable your audio if you have headphones and want to speak about this. And Tom, you might just consider what she has in
Sure.
mind.
Hello, Linda.
Maybe she doesn't have her headset.
No,
but does something come to mind from that question she's posed?
So it seems that, is this the last chat question? It seems that tribe space and personal space have something to do with holacracy. They operate in the background. Is that the question?
No, it's, let's see. There's a couple comments from Krista Schaus, then Deborah says LOL, then Linda says, what about when the work is the innovation like in design work? I think the question emerged for like when you're getting together to do work in role space, if I'm not mistaken. Linda, if you want to add anything else by chat.
Yeah, well, let me just speak to that.
Yeah.
I think the clarity comes from whatever the work is. We're organizing around the work. And if the work is innovation or design or creativity, then we show up in roles to do that work as opposed to individuals, one. And we need to get clear on what the work of those roles are. What are the accountabilities at play to get that work of innovation done? So instead of just being, I'm innovative or I'm creative and we have ideas, what we want to do is structure that work. Why is innovation important to the organization's work? How is it structured? How are we innovating and capturing that innovation into meaningful outputs to help the organization move forward? That all shows up in role space. And we have the freedom, of course, to define any processes, any innovation processes that work for those roles to get that work done. So we can come up with all sorts of wonderful innovative techniques, innovation techniques, ideation techniques. There's a whole panoply of different methodologies for instilling creativity, from U process to design techniques. But what we want to do is take them from being held personally, just heroically delivered skills and talents that we might carry individually, and capture them and bake them in and get explicit about what the role accountabilities are with respect to that innovation work. So we make it more concrete. Why does the organization care about innovation? And we want to answer that question and get really clear on what that care is and how that shows up. So it's just, we're structuring that work. And if an organization happens to be in the business of needing innovation, then we structure it that way.
Great. Okay. Our next question is from Olivier, and I'm going to enable your audio also. Olivier, if you want to speak, I'll just read your question from the chat. But if the tribe is dysfunctional, it can impact the work. Should the organization intervene in the tribe space then, even though holacracy is not about the people?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. We should not intervene. And two, yes, tribe space definitely affects the work of the organization by the quality of energizers. And I think this is where some of the work is interesting of what happens with healthy tribes and how you get healthy tribes. And an interesting proposition, will holacratic organizations that are aligned around purpose and have clarity of authority and distributed authority that's not fused to individual egos and power holders, will that naturally attract people to create a healthy tribe? I think it's an interesting proposition. We have no data on that yet, but my premise is yes. I think my experience of installing holacracy in organizations, some organizations actually are unhealthy. Some organizations have developed a deep sense of cynicism about how the work is done for really good reasons. And it's those same reasons that the existing power holders are bringing holacracy in to shift things. So I think what we'll find there is that we have a tribe that is not trusting, that is in that space of life sucks, everything sucks around here. And I think it will be very interesting to see over time if by practicing holacracy and getting the organizational needs met, will that have a positive side effect of enhancing the health of the tribe. So instead of, it's a directionality question. Instead of trying to fix the tribe to make the organization better, stay focused on the organization needs, make it better, and I think the tribe will improve.
As the tensions are processed. Yeah, makes sense.
Yes.
Great. Patricio asks, don't people get emotionally attached to their roles? Then what?
Yeah, and of course, yes. Then we have attention, and we have two places to sort that out, and that is in the role space and organizational space. Of course, personal attachment in organizational space tends to be pushed against. So objections can't be raised or surfaced around personal needs or personal tensions. And the process is designed to strip all of those away. And in role space, if there's a charge or energy for something to be such and such way because of a personal desire, and it doesn't align with the organizational needs, that gets mirrored back to you as well. So yes, there's a natural attachment, especially at first, to the work you're doing. The question is, what do you do with that sense of attachment? What is that telling you about you and your work versus the role and the organization's work? And with the space between the two, you have the opportunity to make some choices about that attachment and either detach, or change your relationship with the roles that you're filling and energizing, or change your relationship with the organization, or change your notion of yourself and your relationship and your commitments and your self-conversation. So you have all sorts of choices in that knowing. And I think that's the beauty of holacracy, is it turns the lights on. It holds up a mirror with gentleness and compassion and says, this is reality. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to hold it? How are you going to hold that attachment when it may not serve either you or the organization? What are you going to do?
Yeah, it's really rich. One of the people I see here on the call is Titini. She and I are together in the Waking Down in Mutuality Leadership Council, which is practicing holacracy. And one of the things that that organization did to create Tribe Time was we are a virtual team for the most part. We get together once a year for a big retreat, but otherwise we're virtual. And when we first began practicing holacracy, there was a sense of oh, this is cold and dry, and we didn't realize that we were just in church all the time. And we spontaneously came up with the idea to meet for 30 minutes before our governance and tactical meetings for what we call mutuality time, to just share personally what's going on, brainstorm about work. It was tribe time, but we didn't have that name for it. So I love these distinctions. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, I think it's really important, especially in early practice, early adoption. I don't know what the reason is. It may be how we're communicating it or some expectations up front when you start adopting holacracy that you stop talking to people. You stop meeting and talking human to human. No, you have more enriched communication opportunities, different pathways, multiple channels. Um, and so I think it is, no one wants to be in church
No,
24/7.
right.
I mean, really. So yeah, we want to really highlight there are places or spaces that you can show up to get those needs
Yeah.
met, of course. And the distinction is personal needs versus organizational needs. And that is the chief distinction Holacracy is bringing. It is that chief distinction of separating ourselves, even the collection of ourselves, even the collection of very motivated, like-minded, highly passionate, skilled selves, as something different than the organization. So the organization is different than all of that. And that's one of Holacracy's chief and foremost distinctions. The organization itself is sacred. The organization itself pursues its purpose.
Right.
And so that's a big one.
Yes. And a few more comments here on tribe space from Robert Printable. Do we allocate formal tribal time, for example, Friday afternoon beers? And I can tell you that I just accepted invitations, calendar invitations for our upcoming HolacracyOne retreat. We meet in person for 10 days every couple of months. And invitations were sent out to play frisbee, to play board games, in addition to all our regular church meetings and, role relationship meetings. There are formal tribal times now being established and little traditions that are getting started, and it's wonderful. Anything you want to say about that, Tom?
Yeah, I find that wonderful as well. And what I find interesting is that it is naturally arising. As soon as we called out these different spaces and essentially made it okay to energize tribe space, it started to get energized by those that felt the desire to do so. And I think it comes from that desire to create the space as opposed to the organization trying to catalyze something. I think it's not the organization's place to try to make that show up. As soon as you make that move, you've collapsed tribe space because you've projected upon it some expectation, some need that's not there from the organization, or it's some idea of some power holder, some role that thinks that it would be needed. And that's just all off. So I think tribe space naturally arises from those that are associated with the work and are interested in being together and sharing their experiences together. Now, there are maybe some exceptions, and this is what I was pointing to in the formal presentation, was there's some interesting opportunities, I think, for client organizations to reframe their all hands meeting or their annual gathering or their corporate retreats, to reframe them to be more tribe space, opportunities for tribe space to show up. So I think there is something about that where the organization says, hey, you know, these humans just work a whole lot better when we give them time and space to show up and play. Right? So there may be some interesting correlations between what the organization needs and creating tribe space. But I would be careful with it, at least for
Yeah, I
now.
think holding the clear boundaries and distinctions is most important. Let's look at Linda's comment. It seems to me that work on tribe space without holacracy may not work. However, I suspect that work on tribe space and having members have the awareness of self will make the organization spaces work better.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Linda. It's like tribe space is not new. There's not actually a whole lot new in holacracy, independent. There's just an awareness and a shifting of how it all fits together. Tribe space without power, tribe space without projection of organizational needs, tribe space without the awkward authority political plays. That's what works. It's to have that as a clean and free space to show up in without the awkward power plays, even when you don't want them. So as soon as the CEO walks in the room or the founder walks in the room, the space collapses. And what I experience with HolacracyOne is we've gotten so good at practice and so good at being in our roles and knowing when and we're not, when we are in and when we're not in roles, that those power overlays fall away and tribe space just becomes much more fun. So I think you're spot on. I think holacracy allows tribe space to be much more rich, much more dynamic, much safer for everyone to play in without these political or power overlays or organizational projections.
Right. Then there's a couple questions about why do we meet for 10 days in person? That seems like a lot. And when you're all together, how can you escape tribe space if you don't want it? Well, we do have individual rooms and there's no expectations, as we said, around being in tribe space. So you'll often find me in my room
Yeah,
not participating in things because I need that time to recharge and be away more than others sometimes. And it's just very individual.
I think it is. And I think that goes to the sovereignty of personal space. There are no expectations that you need to interact or interrelate with others um, if that is not something you choose to do. And then the question is that okay for you? Sure, maybe. Is that okay for the organization? Sure, maybe. But we have ways of assessing that. You have ways of assessing that as an individual in your personal space and in the roles that you fill. And the organization has ways of assessing that in terms of your role-filling capacity and your participation in integrating perspectives and getting the needs of the organization met. So there's clear ways of getting visibility into, is that workable to be just more to yourself and in personal space most of the time? And I would say probably yes for some people. That would be just fine and probably just fine for the organization as well.
Yeah. Great. And let's see. So, oh no, lots and lots and lots of work is done during those 10 days, Linda. Those are work retreats. Those are not just tribe space.
Yeah, so the way HolacracyOne calls its time together, it's a partner retreat. So we get 10 days of time together to be in these spaces. So we show up when we're together in all of these spaces over that 10-day period.
Yeah. And Krista's commenting about retreat being a different energy and creativity flourishes in tribe space, like Tom was alluding to, these dinner conversations where new ideas come. And yes, there are lots of governance and tactical meetings. We especially do governance and strategy meetings often at our in-person retreats because those are more extended times together, and it's nice to be in person rather than virtual with longer meetings like that. So it's just what's working now, always dynamically steered, of course. So I think we've reached the end of our time. I want to thank you again, Tom, for this outstanding presentation. We're going to be unpacking it further, each of these roles, not roles, each of these spaces. We've covered a lot already in the community here of organization space and begun to get into role space, and we're going to start looking at tribe and personal space more closely here over the next few weeks and months to come. So thank you so much for sparking this, and thanks everyone for joining us and your great questions and comments. And I'll see you again soon.
Yeah, my pleasure. And
Okay. Bye, everyone.